over the summer for the students. I think it's something that's really important, and I'm glad to see we even have students who haven't even enrolled yet taking in part of this today, and that's wonderful to see. So very excited about that. And this topic, inclusion, diversity, and how it affects our company as a high-performing organization, is something that I'm very passionate about. So looking forward to having an open discussion. See here. So looking at sort of what I would like to have for our outcomes today, I'll give a brief introduction and some of the ground rules for today. Then I want to really get a sense of what your perspectives are about I&D, and so we'll do that through a tool called Kahoot. So if you do not have your cell phone handy, please go get your cell phone, because you'll need that for taking part in our little survey here. Then I want to talk about I&D, that it's not the thing. A lot of people think it's the it thing right now. It's actually the right thing. There's a business case for it. It's not something like charity. It's something that really drives a business to succeed. And then to open up for discussion. I think we all know that this is a very timely and sensitive issue, as we've looked at a lot of the social injustice that's taken place in this country recently. And with that being said, I want to jump into those ground rules, and knowing that this is sensitive, feel free to speak up, feel free to not speak up if you don't feel comfortable about it. All opinions are welcome, but I do ask that everybody's respectful, because this is a topic that has a lot of emotion, a lot of passion behind it. And so, but I want you to all feel like this is a safe place. There's nothing that is a wrong answer. Now, I will say on the quiz there might be a wrong answer or two, but it's really to gain perspective as to what your thoughts are. I have plenty of slides to go through, but this works much better to me as a topic that is sort of a roundtable discussion. So I do want to hear from you, so please feel free to stay connected that way. Just a little bit about me. I'm working at Phillips 66 as our senior advisor for university relations within our talent acquisition group, which falls under human resources. I attended TU. I got my management degree from the Collins College of Business, as well as my MBA, and finished out with a law degree in 2015. So licensed to practice here in the state of Oklahoma, based in our Bartlesville office for Phillips 66. Prior to coming to the company, I worked in university advancement and alumni engagement in various roles, from director of law school, alumni, to fundraising and corporate relations. And then I had the privilege of working directly in the College of Business from 2015 to 2017 in Leonel's role. And I can say that I can't think of anybody better to have passed the torch to, and she definitely does a lot better job than I would have ever done. So very happy to have Leonel there. And for those of you who have not paid a visit to Leonel, please set up some time to do that. If you follow everything that she says and tells you to do, you have a 99.9% chance of getting a job. So Business Career Center is a great place. Some of my engagement here at Phillips 66, and we'll talk about employee resource groups towards the end, but part of our new hire network. So anybody who comes to the company, whether they have 20 years of experience or they're fresh out of college, if they're here for the first 5 years, then they become part of the new hire network. Another group that I'm proud to be a part of is our Pride 66 group. So this is our LGBTQ group, and it really is an amazing organization to be a part of. We just hosted Virtual Pride Month, and it was a kick. We had some comedians come in. We did drag queen bingo on the weekend. We did happy hours. It was all kinds of fun things for Pride, and so really proud of us being able to flex in that space for Phillips 66. So with that, we will move into getting your perspectives. So get those cell phones out And if you can open your browser to kahoot.it, and once you're there, you should be able to enter in a PIN number, and that PIN is 912075. And to keep everybody anonymous, I have selected a way for you all to have random cute character names, so you don't have to enter your own name.
I was going to ask about my name. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So we have a knowing possum. We have an excited lion. So. Give you all a few more minutes to get logged in here. All right, looks like, okay, we got a Rapid Yeti. That's a good one. I haven't seen that one. All right, well, we'll go ahead and start. So this is on implicit bias, and so going back, the question is, the unconscious assumptions we make about others based on their identity labels is called what? All right, so great. The correct answer is implicit bias. And the reason for that is that we do these things unknowingly. And so they're things that happen because of how we're brought up, how we're raised, perspectives on things. Within implicit bias, you do see a result of implicit bias as inequity. Racism and hate are actual conscious assumptions that you make. Those are things that you are physically, actively doing. And it's not your brain doing it because of how you were brought up, but it's actually things that you're consciously doing. So that's where racism and hate comes in. Again, implicit bias is based more on what you have witnessed or seen, or what you think you have seen from your upbringing. So move on to the next question. We do blank of our thinking in our subconscious mind, where we collect and then store implicit bias. So what percent do you think your subconscious mind provides? And I was shocked when I saw this one. Yeah, so it's 98%. So 98% of the things that we think and do are done unconsciously. And that's where implicit bias is stored. And it's really, I would have thought maybe 78%. It was hard for me to believe it was 98%, but that's where it happens. And it's it's how we're shaped and formed in the communities that we're part of, our families, our education, our backgrounds, socioeconomic, first generation, those types of things have all these impacts on our unconscious bias. And 98% of that is formed within the subconsciousness of our mind. So move on to the next question. How are personal biases shaped? What shapes those? All right, so here's the thing. There is no wrong answer here. So I'm really, this is really to just get a sense of where you think this is coming from. You're not allowed to pick all three, but there's no wrong answer in this area. So all three of these are areas that actually affect our personal biases. I talked about life experience. I think if we look at the media today, 24/7 news cycle, they certainly shape our media, certainly shapes our personal biases. And, you know, I look at some people may watch one channel over another because it helps confirm what they want to believe and what they do believe, as opposed to expanding your mind and taking in another perspective or seeking a different perspective. So, and culture. There are just cultural issues, from whether they're race, gender, sexuality, those types of things, all impact our personal biases. And so they do exist. And so just being cognizant about what is impacting you, I think is very important. So why does implicit bias matter? All right, again, so there are no wrong answers here. Implicit bias totally affects every single one of these things. But I think the top two, it influences how we treat and interact with others, and it perpetuates disparities, is definitely what we look at as a company at Phillips 66, and wanting to have an inclusive society here at the company, because it does determine how we treat and interact with each other. If you don't feel included because of someone's implicit bias, you're less likely to feel safe in your workplace to contribute thought, to give back to the company through your human capital. And so it's something that I really look at the top of my list as well. And it does perpetuate disparities. So, for example, if you have a hiring manager who thinks that a certain type of person is perfect for the job, and then they continue to hire that person within their organization, you're not being inclusive, and you're starting to lead to a situation where you're getting single-minded group thought that really has a business impact. If you don't have an inclusive and safe society, you don't have that diversity of thought that helps generate the great ideas that find great solutions. I will say, though, that the bottom two are certainly things that happen as well. We've seen, even though it's illegal to make a decision on who can rent or a home or get a loan, it's illegal to base it off of, you know, race, gender, those types of things. They're the equal housing opportunity laws that exist. However, your implicit bias can still skew you away from that, and there's a way to skirt around the law. So those are some of the impacts, direct impacts of implicit bias. But again, I want to go back to those top two from a Phillips 66 standpoint and from a corporate standpoint. It really talked about is the influences of how we interact with each other, and it perpetuates disparities within an organization. All right, so generalization about a person or group without regard for individual differences is known as xenophobia, stereotype, inequity, or scapegoating. All right, that is correct, 100% stereotype. So xenophobia is more based off of, you know, having a particular distaste for somebody from outside of the country, you know, whether that be someone from India or China or Germany, for example. Those are xenophobic type things. Scapegoating is blaming a certain race or group for things that happen. And inequity is just part of not being fair across the board. So stereotyping is the correct answer. It can lead to inequity for sure. It can lead to xenophobia, and it can also lead to scapegoating. But for the purposes of this, it is stereotype. All right, so what does it mean to be inclusive? So again, there are no wrong answers here for this one. All of these are part of being inclusive, and I want to talk about this a little bit more when we go to our roundtable discussion. But it really is, I think, for me, I get the most sense of inclusion when I'm thinking about creating an environment where all people feel that they belong. It also does require that we commit to representing diverse social groups and identities. It does make sense that we have to commit to diverse social groups, to supporting diverse social groups and identities, and that we embrace diverse social groups and identities. So those are all right answers. But I think the overarching goal, and for Phillips 66, it's certainly our overarching goal, is that we create an environment where people feel they belong. When you feel you belong somewhere, you feel safe, you feel that you're empowered, and you feel that you can make a difference within your organization, which helps unleash that high-performing trait that we look for in our employees. All right, so someone who speaks out on behalf or takes actions that are supportive of others is called? That's right, an ally. And we'll go into allies a little bit later when I talk about employee resource groups, but yes, the correct answer there is ally. All right, and last question. To fight bias and make the world a more inclusive, accepting, and equitable place, I can. All right, and all these are correct answers. These are all things you can do to help mitigate your implicit bias and to really become a more thoughtful and inclusive individual, whether that's at the university, in your classroom and in your student groups, student organizations, or if it's in the workplace during your internship or if you're brand new to a company. These are all things that you can do to help mitigate your bias. But one of the things I think is most important, and this is not in the quiz, is that we have to admit that we have these biases. It's something that, again, 98% of our subconscious mind is powering it. And so the old adage, admitting you have a problem is the first step in solving the problem. So not everybody's comfortable with admitting that or saying that. It doesn't mean you have to go send a memo out and saying, these are my biases and introduce all of them. But knowing that you may have them is the first step in combating them and learning how to get past them. So I appreciate everybody working through these questions, and hopefully they stimulated some thought as we move on in our conversation. So I want to move into inclusion and diversity at Phillips 66 and just give you some really interesting statistics here moving forward. So as we know, the world is changing rapidly and quickly. We have to be agile and efficient and smart in the way in which we do business. And that means we have to be open to all ideas. And I'll talk about how Phillips 66 is doing that in the end. But here are some interesting stats that comes from our Director of Inclusion and Diversity, Natasha Buchanan, who's a good friend and colleague of mine. But I think these are really interesting to see. So if you look at the average lifespan of a company in the Fortune 500, it's decreased 60%. So what this is saying is that most companies were 75 years old in the Fortune 500. Now the average lifespan of a company is 15 years. So change is coming quickly. People are moving in, moving fast. Technology is aiding that. Changes in how we do business. I think we're going to see a ton of changes after COVID-19. You're already seeing that in higher education. We're seeing it in companies as well. 40% of companies within the Fortune 500 are new since 2000. So again, these money makers are moving into the market very quickly at young ages, and that's being driven by a new workforce that consists of Generation Z, Millennials, even Gen Xers. So this is probably outdated, but 2.5 bytes of data created every day. So I'm not a MIS or IT person, so I can't tell you what the Q means, but it's a lot of data basically that's coming through, that's generated every day. And I guarantee you this is out of date because it changes every single day. So much information is out there, and again, it helps to shape our minds as we talked about media and culture. And what I think is even more interesting is 90% of the data that we use in the world today was created in the last 2 years. And there's a lot of demographic data about individuals that companies are using, marketers are using, news channels are using, and again, it helps to perpetuate that implicit bias. So things are moving quickly and adapting quickly, and they're making decisions for us based on the demographics and the data that we provide. So I want to jump into what is inclusion and diversity. So we talk about inclusion and diversity constantly. You hear it, like I said, it's not the thing, it's the right thing to do. So I want to open up the discussion with this question for you all, and feel free to chime in and unmute your mic. And again, there's no wrong answer. As you saw in the questions, there's several right answers, of course. So Phillips 66, we call it inclusion and diversity. A lot of other companies, you'll see D and I. We consider I and D. So why do you think Phillips 66 as a company leads with inclusion as opposed to leading with diversity?
And everyone should be able to unmute yourself because I didn't turn that setting on. So feel free to unmute and just chime in.
Hello. I thought maybe you put diversity before inclusion because it's not just who you work on behalf, but who you work for. So you want to be able to work in a space where you feel included, or you feel like you can see someone else that looks just like you, or you feel represented, not just as someone that could be going to Phillips 66 as a consumer or as a customer, but as someone that is a part and feels a part of the company.
Yeah, that's a really great perspective. And when you feel included, and this isn't necessarily just at work, but when you feel included, what kind of feelings do you all get? When you feel that you're included in something, whether it's a student organization, a classroom project, something with your friends. What are some of the adjectives you would use to describe the feeling of being included? I know for me, I feel safe when I'm included, and that I'm supported. So those are some of the things that I feel. But what are some other thoughts out there?
I definitely feel valued, like I'm contributing, and that someone sees that. Just knowing that someone, like you say, it's like safe. Safe is a good way to say it. Yeah.
Like my voice matters.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So I think when we're included, we feel empowered to really do the things that we want to do. And at the same time, if you feel included, it may be that you're someone who's a silent contributor and you don't want to speak up. And we have to be cognizant of that as leaders in businesses and support those individuals who want to be those silent individual contributors, and they don't necessarily want to have to, add something new to the conversation in a public forum, but may want to do it aside. And I certainly want everybody to realize that being included doesn't mean you have to say something every single time, but it's the opportunity to be able to. And I think that's a major difference. So we lead with inclusion for those reasons, because we feel that at Phillips 66, if you're included, then you can bring your authentic self to work. And that authentic self is that diversity component. It's the piece about being visible and less visible differences and having those available for you. I will tell you that never in my life would I have thought that I would march as an openly gay man in a pride parade. But Phillips 66, through Pride 66, provided me that opportunity. And I then never would have thought ever that we would have pride flags with the Phillips 66 logo on one side and pride on the other. And even more so, I never would have thought that we would light up our building like we did for Pride Week down in Houston. When you look at oil and gas and you look at the history of that energy industry, those aren't things that you necessarily pair with the industry. And so Phillips 66 recognizes that I have to feel safe at work. I have to feel included at work to bring my authentic self, which is my most productive self, to work. So this is why inclusion and diversity is so important to me. So in order for us to have an inclusive environment at Phillips 66, there's a couple things that have to be done. First, we have to have leaders engaged. But with leaders engaged, that means no gimmicks. So it's not just a CEO writing a letter saying, I support inclusion and diversity. It's seeing our leadership with boots on the ground, supporting our employee resource groups, aligning their business unit efforts for I&D strategy. So that goes past just hiring. It includes vendor management and working with vendors who support an inclusive and diverse workplace, encouraging employees to take part in resource groups, making those employee resource groups accessible across the company. Those are things that are really important in order for inclusion and diversity to thrive. And our key enablers is leading with inclusion, and then having a leader-driven I&D strategy, which we do, and our CEO and chairman chairs the I&D Council at Phillips 66. Each member of the executive leadership team is part of that, as well as our ERG sponsors. And then continue to tell our story. We think it's really important to have an outlet for employees to share their feelings. Right after the really big launch, obviously, of the Black Lives Matter movement this past summer, I was so thankful that my manager said, okay, this is our team meeting, we're scrapping the agenda. Everybody feel free to share what you want to say, if you have something to say. And people, cried in that session. People shared anger, people shared disappointment, but it was so refreshing to know that I work at a place that is so inclusive and supports us that we can do that. We can cry in front of each other over the social injustice that we're seeing, that we can have those open and frank discussions, or that someone can sit quietly and not have to partake in it if they choose not to. And then being able to have a moment of solidarity globally was something that I think was really great for Phillips. So that's something that, again, continuing to tell our story and providing that outlet is very, very important. Find the mouse here. So just a couple of things, and then I want to go back to your thoughts and your discussions. Here are our employee resource groups. So you, as you join Phillips 66, you can be a part of any employee resource group you want. The only one that you do term out of is after 5 years, you're no longer considered a new hire. So you do have to leave the new hire group after 5 years. But other than that, it doesn't matter who you are, what you look like on the outside. And this is where being an ally is really important. So we probably have more allies in Pride 66 than we do actual LGBTQ individuals. Our Black Employee Network, our executive sponsor for that, is white, but he is an ally of Black community, and so he supports that employee resource group. So being an ally is just as important as embracing your own differences. As we focus on I&D, it's about reaching, it's about teaching, and it's about keeping our employees. It helps us expand our pipeline, and it helps us connect the company to the community. When the community sees that we're an inclusive company, they're more likely to engage with us, and it's part of our corporate social responsibility to definitely be engaged in that space for our communities. So let's go ahead and I want to open the floor for questions about your thoughts on inclusion and diversity. This is an open space, safe conversations. If you don't want to ask the question, you can text me and I'll cover the question. So my cell phone number there is 918-812-3941. So feel free to text me if you want to text your question, if you want to be anonymous. There's not a dumb question out there, and I really want to hear your thoughts. So I talk with a lot of college students about inclusion and diversity, and I actually taught courses on it at some schools in Colorado and across our portfolio. And I take away so much from these sessions, and so they're really important for me to hear, to get your feedback so we know how we can move into a space that's comfortable for your generation. So with that, I'll open the floor. Steve?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for giving us an open, safe space, because this is a rough question. This is a tough question I'm getting ready to ask. Can you go back a slide? Okay. How do you reply to those that feel excluded because they don't have a group? The text is kind of small, so I was struggling. I think that fourth one is Native American.
Yeah, so we have Asian American Network, Black Employee Network, Hispanic Network, Native American Network, New Hire, Pride 66, Veterans Network, and Women's Network.
Right, so because it's me and I'm not shy, old white male, cisgender, heterosexual doesn't fit into any of this. As myself, I would have to become an ally to support one of these that I don't belong to. How do you reply to those questions?
Yeah, so see, that's a really good question, and there's a couple responses I have for that. First of all, ERGs are not mandatory. No one is required to be part of one. You don't have to participate in them if you do not want to. There's no repercussions for that. There are a lot of employees who may just not have the time to be part of it, or they're just not interested in that conversation. Second, we do have the ability to add additional ERGs, and so some of these employee resource groups are not at every location. For example, Pride 66 just got added to our San Francisco refinery over the past few months, so that's a new addition. And for example, we have a lot more Native Americans participating here in Bartlesville than we do maybe at our refining site in New Jersey. So there is the ability to create and expand employee resource groups, and that comes from our Inclusion and Diversity Office. The third point is, again, having that open dialogue and being able to communicate. So if you were to go to Natasha Buchanan, who's our Director of Inclusion and Diversity, and say, I don't feel like I have a home here, I don't feel included because there's not an ERG for me. There are ways for you still to be engaged without you even having to be an ally within those groups, to continue the dialogue on what you feel are attributes of yours, or parts of your diversity, whether they're visible or less visible, and feel supported. And we encourage frontline leaders to do that. As part of our training as frontline leaders, our executives do that as well. So for example, I look at, there's not an employee resource group necessarily for single mothers, or there's not one for parents dealing with kids that are, home from school because of COVID. But we have flexed in that space and provided some resources to make sure that we are taking care of individuals as their situations change. Another important thing that we're looking at from a total rewards perspective is that we realize that in different stages of your life, different things affect you. So for example, my concern is on my student loans right now, where somebody who has been at the company a lot longer, their concern might be taking care of their parents who need additional medical resources. So being flexible with not only our total rewards, but being able to flex and provide outlets to continue telling our story as things arise throughout. So that's a great question, Steve, and it's something that there's not a right answer to, but it's something that we look at and trying to really flex into the space of being available and taking care of every employee to make sure they do feel included, even if they don't have a branded employee resource group.
Great, thank you.
And one thing, Calvin, if you don't mind, I want to add to it from the TU perspective and a little bit from my background, having overseen the employee resource groups at Phillips. When they were created, and they're called employee networks, they may be called ERGs now, we looked at definitely the marginalized groups to start off with, the groups that were not well represented. And so that was a question I got a lot at that company was, where's the white man group, And my response was always, you are more than welcome to work through that and to form that network, but what's going to be your goal? Is that going to be inclusive? So fast forward to the University of Tulsa, who just, and Amy can can chime in too, the Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee of the Staff Advisory Council, which I chaired, launched employee networks for the University of Tulsa that we never had before, because there were one-offs of groups meeting. So sometimes our admissions folks were meeting just as single or as working moms, and so it was very non-inclusive. And we really wanted to mimic what our student organizations had. And in that, we talked about what are the stages in life, because when we look at it and, we think about employee resource groups, going back to marginalized groups, we tend to think about that in race or ethnicity or sexual orientation, but really taking a look at, okay, what about those who have to care for a parent? As someone who had to care for an aging grandparent, there was no support. So I say all that to say, one of my favorite lines I hear, especially during this time, is it's definitely a movement. It's not a moment. So the nature of ERGs is definitely going to change as the demographics of the workforce change. I think at our students and how, it changes. I've been approached about a minority student business association in the College of Business, because we don't really have that. We used to with, NAB, the National Association of Black Accountants, but that was for accounting, and so just how that constantly shifts. So just wanted to echo Calvin's point of, it's right now, but it's definitely a movement. It's a marathon to get these right, and companies and organizations build that flex into it. I'm working with an organization now who is developing their first employee network. I'm consulting with them on how do you go about doing that. And it's hard, right? Because the questions are like, well, how do we know if we exclude someone? But we work through it, and we know that it's going to change, and it's not definitely set in stone.
Awesome, thanks, Leona.
Any other questions that you all might have?
So, Colin, I had one, not to speak on behalf of students, but, putting on my director, assistant dean hat. So recruiting season. And so as we, look at it, take out the COVID piece, right? So, so just normal recruiting and feeling safe in that environment of I'm approaching a table or, on a call, and I want to see an employee that looks like me, to know that that's what's represented. So can you talk a little bit about how Phillips 66 is ensuring that forward-facing, that outward-facing look of inclusion and diversity when it comes to recruiting students?
Yeah, Lena, that's a great question. And I will tell you from a recruiting standpoint, it's something that we struggle with as a company, but not necessarily just as a company, but I think as an energy industry overall. It's a very, white male dominated industry from the past that's changing. I'm excited to say that our new hire class was 50% female. Our intern class was 40% underrepresented minorities that we brought in for this year. So some great numbers. We're definitely making a difference, but totally understand why would I go to a booth where I don't see anybody that looks like me, and why should I be there? And so what we are doing now is looking at not necessarily recruiting as a right, but recruiting as a privilege. And so you may see that we don't have TU alumni coming to the career fair booth, but we have people who represent the company from a diversity perspective and from a high performing organization perspective, and someone that can deliver excellence and share the Phillips 66 story. So it's a big shift for us. Lena, I think you probably know from your time at ConocoPhillips that, you know, everybody thought once you were 2 years into the company, you got to go back to your campus. It was like a mini homecoming, and you could do the career fair and lunch and learns and all that. And so we're shifting the mentality of what that is. Also providing our recruiters with training around diversity issues. And so helping them not dodge the question, but empowering them with tools to be able to discuss what it's like at Phillips 66 to have diversity. But again, it is a complete challenge for us. I think the other part of that process, as a company, we are very Midwestern in our roots and where we recruit from. So if you look at the schools that we recruit from, a lot of those schools lack diversity. Why do they lack diversity? For the exact same reasons that they don't want to come to the company, because they don't see a professor that looks like them, or professors don't see students who look like them. And so we are supporting some of our institutions who really are lacking in the diversity numbers with those efforts to recruit faculty and retain faculty of diverse backgrounds, as well as supporting summer bridge programs for first generation underrepresented minorities and those who are socioeconomically impacted. So those are some of the things that we're working on. So it's an entire cycle. You know, it doesn't start with a career fair. It starts with, you know, getting the right people, finding the right talent in the right places, and that includes students of diversity with diverse backgrounds. We also will be partnering more and more now with some of the national organizations, so Society of Women Engineers. We just joined as a partner for the National Society of Black Engineers at the national level, and taking advantage of some of those career fairs. But yeah, it can be a scary thing. You know, I work a lot with a TU veterans group, for example, and our veterans are very hesitant to come up at the career fair because what do they see? They see a 21-year-old fresh out of college recruiting that doesn't have the same exact experience that those veterans do. And so educating our recruiters to look at student veterans and going directly to the source of diversity. So saying, okay, let's do our own career fair for this group or for that group and really recruit from those areas to show that we're interested in that space. So it's a challenge, but it's a challenge we are trying to hit head on and tackle.
Awesome. And just to follow up, and you may have mentioned it, and I may have missed it, on the implicit bias. So that's one of the things I'm talking with like our admissions office about. Like, so I do some implicit bias training. So do you all put your recruiters through that? Just because when you mentioned confirmation bias, which I, you know, guilty of confirmation bias, guilty of affinity bias. You know, I want, you know, when I was a recruiter, I wanted to hire all TU students, but do you all go through that?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Lena, and I will tell you that, you know, we have an amazing team in inclusion and diversity, but with 14,000 employees, we can't really get out to everybody. So we do have some trainings that are available, but we're looking into some of the best products and really providing some training from the experts. Not to say that Natasha and Jill, who are leading our inclusion and diversity efforts, are not experts. They certainly are ahead of the game when I look at some other peers of theirs at other companies. But let's bring in the experts. Let's bring in the people and do it right the first time. And so I think that's, you know, where we're headed. We were looking at some vendors towards the end of the winter, and then obviously certain things have happened where we've been out of the office and that sort of thing. But we do use things like LinkedIn Learning, and there are some virtual implicit bias trainings that are available. But we really do want to provide a classroom-based in-person training. And some business units have done that on their own. but we definitely want to have a coordinated effort company-wide.
I like that. That's awesome. Yeah, because I think it's very handy. Well, definitely for recruiter, the folks going out recruiting,
Yep.
to definitely have that. But that's awesome. So glad to hear that. Thank you.
I was just going to put a plug in for us non-traditional students, and it really is, when we go to a career fair, it's really nice to see someone that's not 21, 22 looking for other 21, 22-year-olds. I can't remember if there was ever a veteran on Conoco or P66, but I don't know if you guys remember Vincent Rodriguez from One Oak. He's a veteran, and he was on their recruiting team, and he's on their veteran ERG, or whatever their ERGs are called over there. And it's always nice for us, not, well, I say for non-traditionals, but for veterans anyway, as well as some age in there is nice to see.
Yeah, and I'll tell you where my passion really came in at the company for inclusion and diversity, and it was at a career fair. And it was actually at TU's career fair, and someone who is related to me is a student veteran, non-traditional student, and that individual came to our booth, and I heard a recruiter say that we don't recruit student veterans because we think that there might be conflict with age and experience compared to the other interns. And it took every ounce of me to maintain my cool and calm. And when I heard that from recruiters of my own institution, an alum of TU, and somebody at the company said that, I was just floored. And I said, I've got to get more involved in inclusion and diversity. And so that was what really launched it. And again, I'm being very open and transparent with you all because it's a safe place. I wouldn't always share that story. But that really hit me hard and really launched my major interest in working with our inclusion and diversity office here at Phillips 66.
I think the biggest thing is they don't want to have to retrain someone like us who has already got a way of doing things. They've built experience and they know how to do something, and they're having to change the way we think to do it their way versus just training a recent college grad. I've seen that in a few places, regrettably, and I'm hoping it changes.
Me too.
What other thoughts?
If there aren't any other questions, I do want to end with something that I think is very unique to Phillips 66. It is unique to Phillips 66. In fact, our CIO, who's worked in the industry for over 30 years, Brad Rector, who's also the executive sponsor for TU, has shared that he's never seen anything like this at any of the companies he's worked for. And what is a product of our successful, high-performing organization and being inclusive, and that's something that we call our energy in action. So we really talked about these are the behaviors, this is what we'd like to see, but then we actually put pen to paper. We had various level of leaders, frontline leaders, executive leaders come in and develop what we call our energy in action. And it has 4 pillars, and I believe honestly that inclusion and diversity is the foundation in each of these. Working for the greater good, creating an environment of trust, seeking different perspectives, and achieving excellence. So these are major pieces that we want each employee to exhibit in their behaviors at the company. So you can see we talk about what looks good, what doesn't look good, and what we'd like the outcome to be. And this is more than just words on paper. We will be using this as part of our employee evaluations coming up for this evaluation cycle. So making sure that we are showing that we're doing these 4 things to build what I think is an inclusive and diverse workplace for Phillips 66 and a leader in the energy industry. So happy to share these with you. I think these are 4 pillars that don't stop at the office. These are things that I think we should be doing as individuals every single day. We should always be working for the greater good. You should always seek different perspectives. Create an environment of trust with your friends and your classmates, and make sure that you are achieving excellence in everything that you do. And one of the first steps of that is participating in these career chats with the employers. You are setting yourself up for a lot of success for networking and recruiting and taking the time this summer to participate. So I want to thank Leonel and the Collins College of Business and the Business Career Center and each of you today for joining in and being willing to share and be open. You still have my cell phone number. If you do want to text me and ask a question later on, happy to talk with you. If it wasn't for COVID-19, I'd be doing this on campus as much as I possibly could. But I live in Tulsa. Always happy to connect with students. If you want to meet up for a coffee or something like that, please add me on LinkedIn if you have the opportunity to. Look forward to a day where I don't have to walk down the hall with a mask and I can come to campus and see all the amazing talent that the University of Tulsa has. So it looks like we have maybe a few more minutes if there are questions, but that's really the end of my presentation. So.
Awesome. Well, Calvin, thank you so much. This was wonderful, fantastic. Thank you. Much needed. I just want to thank all the students and everyone who were there today or who were here today, and take Calvin up on his networking offer. You all, again, setting yourselves apart by participating in these chats, a very timely topic, and I just can't thank you enough, Calvin. So thank you so much. So reach out to Calvin, everyone. He is awesome. I text him all the time. So, so reach out to him. So, and does anyone have any last questions or comments? Okay, so just as a reminder, we do these every
Steve,
Wednesday.
is that a shark or a question?
It was me sneaking in a question, but hoping not to cut anybody else off.
Okay, so I just want to remind everyone, next week we have another career chat, and it is entitled, I Don't Know What You Did Last Summer. And so it's really working on how do you go about telling an employer or anyone what it is you did about yourself. So Tom Vincent will be with us, and he is at, I'm going to get it wrong, Gable Gottwal's law firm. so he will, I always get it backwards, but he'll be here, same Zoom link, so feel free to join us. And so Steve, go ahead with your question. So,
yeah, I have opinions, and I have a life experience to base it off of, and I want to know what's the best way for people that have diametrically opposed views on most things to come together and discuss them without one of them getting just completely, shutting off. Just, I don't want to talk about it. Don't comment on my Facebook post. It's my Facebook post. If you don't agree, just scroll past, things like that. I'm open for a discussion on pretty much anything, and I don't really get mad. I might be passionate about something, especially if it comes to military or veterans or things like that. But how do you get them to be open to conversation and not just shutting things down because you don't agree or because you're not 110% behind their point of view? How dare you, and just go away?
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve, and I think everybody struggles with that, and I blame a lot of that honestly on the 24/7 news cycle. I think that's the worst thing that's ever happened to this country, and it just perpetuates arguments back and forth. And I agree, it's when you have a discussion, that passion shows sometimes, and people may misinterpret that passion as anger, or that someone's upset or wanting to argue. It's hard to find that forum where people are willing to be open and have that public debate. And so I don't have the right answer. I think the biggest thing is to, my advice would be, you know, if it's on social media and you see somebody who posts something and you have an opinion that's different, don't respond publicly to the social media. Ask if you can talk offline and get a sense of their willingness to have the discussion with you. And if they decide they don't want to, then don't have it. But I've seen enough of my friends recently who have argued back and forth about things, and it gets pretty nasty. And it doesn't go away on social media. It stays. So I really do not think social media is the outlet to post a response to somebody's comments that you may disagree with. I would suggest reaching out to that individual and saying, you know, hey, do you mind if I message you directly and have this conversation? If someone says something in the workplace, you know, whether or it's with your friends, I always think if you engage somebody one-on-one as opposed to say, you know, you said something that really gave me thought, and I want to understand more, but I also want to share my point of view. Having and diffusing the conversation that way, I think, is really helpful. But to have the discussion in mass in public really does lead to more people butting in, stirring the pot more, and making what could have been a civil discussion a lot more difficult. So always try to engage one-on-one. Ask the question. Don't just begin giving your point of view. And if that individual doesn't want to have the conversation with you, you know, respect that. That also means that they're not an open and thoughtful person. So that would be my advice.
Great, thank you. And sorry about my dog.
Don't be sorry about that. All right, well, thanks again, everybody. I appreciate it. Please stay safe. Please stay healthy. And for those of you who are in the Midwest right now, stay hydrated. It's going to be miserable next week. So thanks, everyone. I appreciate it. And go to you.
Thank you.